We are told we are free. We are told that our choices define us, that our voices matter, that our votes shape the destiny of a nation. But look closer. Beneath the noise, beneath the endless slogans and flags, something darker moves, quietly, efficiently, invisibly. Freedom, as it was once imagined, as it was once fought for, has been hollowed out and replaced by spectacle. It has become theater, a performance that hides the machinery of control behind the illusion of choice. You believe you are choosing, but what you are really doing is consuming. You believe you are thinking freely, but what you are really doing is echoing what has been carefully fed into your mind. The tragedy is not that the system is corrupt. It always was. The tragedy is that we no longer see the chains. They are not made of iron anymore. They are woven from comfort, from distraction, from desire. The old tyrants ruled with whips and prisons. The new ones rule with entertainment and credit scores. They no longer need to silence you. They only need to keep you busy, scrolling, buying, comparing, dreaming of things that will never fill you. Listen to the silence that follows every political speech. The promises, the applause, the flags waving in slow motion, all of it choreographed, all of it designed to make you feel as though something sacred still exists in the machinery of the state. But once the lights go down, nothing changes. The working poor remain chained to wages that cannot sustain a life. The young drown in debt before they even begin. The old are discarded as burdens. And yet we keep believing, because to stop believing would mean to face the truth, that the freedom we celebrate is no longer ours. What they have built is an empire of perception. They have mastered the art of control without visible force. They give us endless choices, this brand or that one, this candidate or the other, but every path leads to the same gatekeepers, the same corporations, the same banks, the same investors who hold our mortgages, our student loans, our healthcare, our very futures. You may think you are living in a democracy, but what you are living in is a managed illusion, a stage, managed performance meant to keep you docile, compliant, hopeful just enough to never rebel. We were not meant to live this way. We were not created to be consumers in an endless carnival of distraction. We were meant to think, to feel, to rebel against lies. But when truth itself is commodified, when outrage is turned into a product, resistance becomes theater too. They have even taken rebellion and sold it back to us as a brand. The slogans of liberation printed on shirts made in sweatshops. The cries for justice echoed through platforms owned by billionaires. Every act of defiance carefully absorbed into the bloodstream of capitalism until it loses its sting. The illusion of freedom is the most dangerous form of slavery because it convinces you that you are free while your soul is being shaped by forces you cannot see. It numbs the moral imagination. It tells you that your life's purpose is to climb ladders built by those who profit from your exhaustion. And by the time you begin to question, by the time you sense that something is deeply wrong, it is already too late. You are part of the system, dependent on it, afraid to leave it. There is a quiet terror that comes from realizing that the institutions meant to protect you, the courts, the schools, the press, the government, no longer serve truth but power. They speak of freedom, but they legislate obedience. They speak of opportunity, but they construct walls. They speak of equality, but they kneel before money. And the citizens, numbed by years of propaganda and distraction, mistake submission for peace. Do you feel it? That hollow ache inside when you realize that the choices you make have already been decided for you. That the products you buy, the news you read, the causes you support, the dreams you chase, all of it fits perfectly into a grander design that sustains their dominion. You were not meant to be a cog in their machine. You were meant to be human, to love, to think, to doubt, to risk everything for truth. But that kind of freedom demands sacrifice. It demands pain. It demands that we tear off the mask of illusion and face what we have become, a people who mistake captivity for comfort. It demands that we stop waiting for someone to rescue us, because the power that enslaves us thrives on our passivity. The illusion of freedom ends the moment we choose to see. And when that happens, when even a few awaken, when even a few begin to live as though their souls cannot be bought, then the empire trembles, because the illusion dies not when the powerful fall, but when the powerless see through the lie. And when the illusion begins to crack, when the curtain lifts even slightly, what you see behind it is not democracy, it is the empire of money, a silent dominion that stretches across every institution, every ideology, every border. It does not need flags or armies. It commands through debt, through ownership, through the slow suffocation of those who labor beneath its shadow. It is an empire without a face, without mercy, without conscience. It rules not from the capital, but from the towers of finance where decisions made in sterile boardrooms decide who eats, who starves, who lives, and who is forgotten. This empire does not conquer nations, it consumes them. It buys their leaders, rewrites their laws, dictates their trade, and calls it freedom. It installs its disciples in positions of power, men and women who no longer serve citizens but serve a capital. They wear the mask of governance, but behind that mask is the same master, the investor, the shareholder, the faceless consortium that measures the worth of life in profit margins. The language of morality has been replaced by the language of markets. The sacred has been replaced by the transactional. Every decision, every policy, every human dream is now weighed against the cold arithmetic of gain. Do you think your leaders speak for you? They don't. They are the ventriloquists of empire, repeating lines written by lobbyists, funded by corporations, and approved by the financiers who see the world not as communities but as commodities. They tell you that the economy is strong while millions are broken. They tell you the stock market is booming while families live out of cars. They tell you unemployment is low while wages are too meager to sustain a single dignified life. This is not governance, it is the systematic looting of a nation disguised as progress. Money has become our god, and like all false gods, it demands sacrifice. It demands that we abandon empathy for efficiency, truth for profit, justice for growth. It rewards cruelty and calls it ambition. It exalts greed and calls it success. The empire of money has rewritten the moral code of an entire civilization. It teaches the young that meaning is found in accumulation, that worth is measured by wealth, that those who fall behind deserve their suffering. And so we compete not to uplift, but to dominate, to stand on the necks of others and call it achievement. The empire thrives because it understands one terrible truth people who are divided cannot resist. So it manufactures division, race against race, worker against worker, left against right, while it quietly drains the lifeblood of all. It does not care whom you hate, as long as your hatred keeps you distracted from those who truly hold the power. The debates, the outrage, the noise. All of it is theater to disguise the theft. The empire knows that the easiest way to rule is to make the ruled believe they are free, and so it has built a religion around money with its own priests and rituals. The bankers and CEOs are its clergy, the financial news its scripture, the quarterly report its gospel. It demands faith, blind faith, in markets that promise prosperity but deliver despair. And those who question it are branded heretics, dreamers, radicals, those who must be silenced or ridiculed until they disappear. But what happens when the god of money begins to devour its own worshippers? When even those who believed in it begin to feel the emptiness gnawing at their souls? When the empire that promised endless abundance delivers only loneliness, despair, and ruin? We are reaching that point. The empire is consuming itself because greed has no limits, and when nothing is sacred, everything becomes disposable, even the planet that sustains us. The forests burn, the oceans rise, the poor starve, and the empire counts its profits. It sells the illusion of a future even as it destroys the possibility of one. And yet we remain obedient, bowing before the altar of progress, unwilling to confront the truth that our civilization has traded its humanity for gold. This is not progress, it is decay disguised as advancement. It is the collapse of a moral order that once believed there were things more valuable than wealth. Look into the faces of those who control this empire, their calm, detached certainty. They do not fear collapse, for they believe they can buy safety, buy justice, buy life itself. But what they cannot buy is redemption. What they cannot own is the awakening of conscience that is beginning to stir beneath the rubble of their empire. Because when enough people see that money is not power, that truth is not for sale, that the soul of a nation cannot be measured in GDP, then the empire begins to tremble. It is trembling now. You can feel it. You can hear it in the cracks of a dying illusion, in the rising anger of a generation that refuses to be owned. And when the people finally remember that their worth is not something to be bought, but something to be lived, then the empire of money will face what it fears most, a humanity that can no longer be purchased. And because the empire cannot rule by force alone, it turns to something far more insidious, the manufacturing of consent. It no longer needs to silence you when it can teach you what to think. It no longer needs to burn books when it can flood your mind with noise until truth itself drowns beneath the weight of distraction. The empire understands that control is not maintained through violence but through narrative, through stories repeated so often that they become reality, through language carefully engineered to blur the line between freedom and servitude, between justice and obedience. The media, once the conscience of the people, has become the empire's most elegant weapon. It does not speak truth to power, it speaks power to the people. It shapes what you fear, what you love, what you believe is possible. It feeds you heroes and villains, turning citizens into spectators. Every headline, every broadcast, every advertisement is a thread in the tapestry of deception. The journalists who once stood against corruption now serve it, rewarded for obedience, punished for truth. The press conferences, the talk shows, the endless cycle of outrage, it is not meant to inform you, it is meant to exhaust you, to keep you chasing shadows while the real crimes unfold in silence. They call it the free press, but freedom means nothing when the hand that feeds also writes the script. The news no longer challenges power, it performs for it. The stories are framed not to awaken, but to pacify. They tell you what to care about and what to forget. They decide which deaths matter and which do not. They keep you fearful, divided, distracted, and always dependent on the next narrative to tell you who you are and what you should believe. It is not journalism. It is psychological warfare. The empire does not simply control information, it controls emotion. It manufactures outrage and relief in perfect rhythm, like a heartbeat it owns. It gives you just enough truth to believe in its credibility, and just enough lies to destroy your will to resist. It feeds you a diet of celebrity scandals, political theater, and tragedy repackaged as entertainment, so that you are never still long enough to question the architecture of your own captivity. And even when you sense the manipulation, even when you know the deceit, you still return, because they have mastered addiction, the addiction to distraction, the addiction to the illusion of knowing. But the most dangerous part of this machinery is not what it tells you, it's what it doesn't. The silence around war crimes committed in your name. The silence around the suffering of those who build your wealth. The silence around the poor, the dispossessed, the forgotten. When the powerful commit atrocities, the media calls it policy. When the weak rise in protest, they call it chaos. This inversion of truth is not an accident, it is the foundation of empire. The powerful understand that lies are not effective because people believe them. They are effective because people are too wary to fight them. And so we learn to live with contradiction. We learn to accept hypocrisy as normal. We are told that censorship is protection, that propaganda is patriotism, that surveillance is safety. We become complicit in our own deception because truth, once glimpsed, demands responsibility, and responsibility is heavy. The empire thrives because it convinces us that comfort is more valuable than truth. It does not need our loyalty, it only needs our indifference. Imagine what it means to live in a society where truth has no sanctuary, where those who speak it are silenced, ridiculed, or erased. The whistleblowers who reveal the empire's crimes are imprisoned. The journalists who expose corruption are exiled. The thinkers who question the system are buried under waves of digital hatred. This is not democracy, it is managed perception, a theater of control where dissent is allowed only if it changes nothing. And yet, even within this manufactured reality, the truth still flickers. It survives in the courage of those who refuse to be bought, in the small publications that dare to print what matters, in the solitary voices that refuse to kneel. The empire can manipulate information, but it cannot kill the hunger for truth that burns in every human soul. That hunger is dangerous because once it is awakened, no narrative can contain it, but awakening comes with a cost. To see the machinery for what it is, to understand how deeply it shapes your mind, is to feel the weight of betrayal. You begin to realize that the world you trusted was built on deceit, that even your emotions have been weaponized against you. It is painful, unbearable even. And yet, That pain is sacred, because only through that suffering can truth be reborn. The Empire knows this. That is why it fights so fiercely to keep you entertained, to keep you distracted, to keep you from ever sitting in silence long enough to ask what is real. But when that question is finally asked, honestly, desperately, without fear, the entire edifice begins to tremble, because consent can only be manufactured as long as people refuse to see who is manufacturing it. And once the eyes of even a few are opened, the spell breaks. The Empire can command the airwaves, but it cannot command the awakening of the human spirit. And when people awaken to the truth that they owe nothing to their oppressors, the Empire strikes back not with violence first, but with temptation. It seduces the spirit. It whispers, why fight when you can have comfort? Why rebel when you can be entertained? Why suffer for truth when pleasure costs so little? And that is how the erosion begins, not of the body, but of the human spirit. What the Empire could not take through fear, it now takes through desire. It empties the soul and fills it with noise, with screens, with endless novelty, until the sacred silence within us, the space where conscience lives, disappears. We have become a civilization addicted to distraction. We scroll through despair as if it were entertainment. We laugh at suffering. We compete for validation. We perform happiness while hollow inside. The Empire knows that a people who cannot sit with their own thoughts will never ask dangerous questions. It feeds us pleasure until we forget what meaning feels like. It replaces reflection with reaction, intimacy with performance, empathy with spectacle. And in this great substitution, something eternal dies, the ability to feel deeply. The tragedy of our time is not that we are oppressed. It is that we no longer remember what it means to be alive. We confuse stimulation for joy, consumption for identity, noise for purpose. The Empire has redefined existence as a transaction. We no longer ask, who am I? We ask, what can I buy? And so the human spirit, once vast and uncontainable, shrinks to fit the dimensions of a screen. Our ancestors built cathedrals and carved philosophies in stone because they believed the soul was infinite. We build shopping malls and chase algorithms because we have forgotten that truth. The modern world does not crucify prophets, it simply drowns them in advertising. The voices that once cried in the wilderness are now buried beneath influencers and clickbait, beneath endless distractions designed to keep us numb. The Empire knows that if it can numb you, it can own you. A numb soul does not resist. A numb soul does not dream. And this numbness has a cost. You can see it in the loneliness that fills our cities, in the quiet despair that hides behind smiling faces. We are surrounded by everything and connected to nothing. The community has been replaced by competition. The neighbor has become the rival. Love has been commodified, turned into content. Even grief, once sacred, is now marketed. The Empire has monetized every human emotion. It has turned our longing for connection into a business model. This is how the human spirit erodes, not in sudden collapse, but in slow corrosion. Each small compromise, each silent acceptance, each comfort chosen over conscience, it adds up. Until one day, we wake and realize that we no longer feel outrage at injustice, that the suffering of others no longer shakes us, that the images of war, hunger, and cruelty have become just another flicker on the screen. The Empire has succeeded when we can look upon horror and feel nothing. But deep beneath that numbness, the soul still trembles. It knows something sacred has been stolen. It knows that the glittering world of consumption is built on ashes, the ashes of meaning, of purpose, of the divine spark that once made humanity noble. That spark, buried but not dead, is what the Empire fears most. Because the moment we begin to feel again, truly feel, their spell begins to break. To feel again means to suffer again. To allow the weight of reality to pierce through the walls of distraction. It means to confront the emptiness that all their comforts cannot fill. It means to face grief, to face guilt, to face the truth that we have been complicit in our own enslavement. It is painful, excruciating even, to rediscover conscience after so long a sleep. But that pain is holy. It is the fire that purifies. The Empire calls this awakening madness. It calls compassion weakness. It mocks those who step out of the current and refuse to be swept along. But every great act of liberation begins with that madness, the refusal to pretend any longer, the willingness to feel, because once you begin to feel, you begin to see, and once you see, you can no longer live as before. That is why the Empire fears art, fears poetry, fears love that cannot be bought, because these are the last sanctuaries of the human spirit, places where truth still breathes. When a man paints honestly, when a woman speaks truthfully, when a child laughs freely, the empire trembles, because in those moments humanity returns. And a people who remember their own humanity cannot be ruled. The erosion of the spirit is not inevitable. It is a choice. Every time we turn away from suffering, every time we trade depth for distraction, we let the empire win. But every time we choose stillness over noise, empathy over apathy, courage over comfort, we reclaim a piece of what was lost. The battle for the soul of humanity will not be fought in parliaments or markets. It will be fought in the silence of each heart that dares to feel again. And when enough hearts awaken, when enough spirits rise from the ashes of numbness, the empire that once ruled the world will find itself powerless before a humanity that has remembered its own sacred worth. And when humanity begins to remember its sacred worth, when the numbness begins to melt, and the first tremors of conscience ripple through the hearts of those who once slept, something begins to stir that no empire can contain. It is the awakening, not a loud revolution, not the clashing of armies or the storming of palaces, but a quiet, burning awareness that spreads from soul to soul like a flame passed in the dark. It begins with one person who refuses to bow, who refuses to live a lie any longer, and then another, and another, until what once seemed eternal, the power of the oppressor, the machinery of deceit, begins to tremble beneath the weight of truth reborn. The awakening always begins in silence. It begins in the solitude of a human heart that can no longer bear the hypocrisy, the cruelty, the endless pretense.